Welcome to Vermont's Voice. My name is Elijah Kushen. I'm the media director here at VPIRG, the Vermont Public Interest Research Group. Today's episode is all about plastic and plastic pollution. Later, I'll be joined by my colleague, Alexis Drown. Alexis is VPIRG's Environmental Policy Associate and hails from Milton, Vermont. Later, we will be joined by Judith Enck, an expert on the plastics issue and author of the book, The Problem with Plastic. But more on that in a minute. This is Vermont's Voice. For today's conversation about the plastics issue, we're joined by Judith Enck. Judith Enck is the president of Beyond Plastics, the co-author of The Problem with Plastic, published last December. Judith was appointed by President Obama to serve as the EPA Regional Administrator in Region 2 and was the longest-serving Region 2 Regional Administrator. Prior to that, she served as Deputy Secretary for the Environment in the New York Governor's Office and Policy Advisor to the New York Attorney General. She got her start in the environmental community, working side by side with now VPIRG Executive Director Paul Burns. Judith helped pass New York's original bottle bill in 1982, worked to block the construction of garbage incinerators in New York's Hudson Valley, promoting waste reduction and recycling. She's currently a professor at Bennington College, teaching an online class on plastics, which is open to students and community people alike. You can find more info at beyondplastics.org. Judith, welcome to Vermont's Voice.
I'm thrilled to be with you. I'm a huge fan of VPIRG, and I count VPIRG as one of the most effective environmental advocacy and education groups in the whole country. And like many of your listeners, I am the president of the Paul Burns fan club.
Well, I might be biased, but it certainly warms my heart to hear that. Why don't we jump right in? You just released a book called The Plastic Problem. What's the problem with plastic?
Oh, so much. So yes, in December, we published a book with the New Press called The Problem with Plastic. You can get it anywhere you buy books. It makes the perfect birthday gift. And in the book, we talk about how plastics are made from 16,000 different chemicals and ethane, a byproduct of hydrofracking. So plastic production is very much a climate change issue. The book describes how plastics are affecting our health, which I hope we can spend a little time talking about. The book details how we are turning our ocean into a watery landfill with unprecedented amounts of plastics going from streams to rivers to the ocean and then building up in the marine environment. And finally, we make the case for the need to reduce plastics because plastic recycling has not worked and never will work. And we also offer some tips at the end of the book on what you can do in your own kitchen, in your own life. This can be a daunting topic, but we have a chapter where we profile about 8 amazing women all over the country that are leading the way and getting results on reducing plastics. That chapter is called Cause for Hope. So we deal with what you can do in your own life, the need for new laws, and then who is leading the way to protect our ecology and our public health from plastics.
Wow. Sounds like a good read.
Yeah, thank you so much for all of your work on that. I read your book. It was absolutely fantastic. I know kind of another part of, the problem with plastic is related to kind of industry deception and misinformation. And one of the more recent examples of that is something called so-called chemical recycling. VPIRG has actually been working to ban chemical recycling in Vermont. So I'm curious if you could kind of dive into what is that? Why is it so important that states are working to ban these processes and these facilities, even in a state like Vermont, where we might not, be the most immediate target for an industrial facility like this?
It's great that VPIRG is working on this because I think people are finally understanding that we should keep recycling our paper, metal, glass, and metal and cardboard. Please recycle all of that. Compost your yard waste and food waste. But plastic recycling has been an abysmal failure because there are too many different types of plastics, too many different chemicals, too many different colors. So, for instance, a bright orange detergent bottle on your washing machine cannot be recycled with your film plastic bread bag. So, that same problem that plagues more traditional recycling also plagues chemical recycling. Chemical recycling is heating waste plastic at a really high temperature and creating low grade fossil fuel, the last thing we need. The industry says this is new, it's innovative, the business is just getting started. In fact, they've been trying to do this since the 80s. The plastics industry calls it advanced recycling. It's not advanced and it's not recycling. It's a talking point for plastics lobbyists who show up when legislators are thinking about actual thoughtful policies to reduce plastic. So this is their Hail Mary pass. We took a very close look at this because the industry folks are always arguing that we can do chemical recycling rather than reduction. So I wanted to see just how many facilities are there in the US and how much plastic waste are they handling. Most of them are creating a lot of pollution locally. Many of these facilities are sited in low-income communities of color, known as environmental justice communities. When we did a report on this with our friends at IPEN, we were very generous in how we counted the number of facilities. Even if they're not fully operating, if they're permitted, we counted them. We only found 11. And since then, 3 have been shut down and some are declaring bankruptcy. So again, if you are generous with how much they're handling, it's just over 1% of the plastic waste stream. So it's not a viable solution. And what's important is that we not only prohibit these polluting facilities within our own state borders, but also when you're developing laws that require reduction, reuse, recycling, don't let chemical recycling count as real recycling. Otherwise, you're going to have plastic waste exported to Tennessee and Texas and Louisiana, and big brands saying this counts as recycling.
That sounds scary. So, chemical recycling, definitely a bad thing. You did briefly mention mixed recycling, the blue bin on the curbside. What's the difference there for our listeners at home who might not know all that much about how recycling works?
Well, you want to start with keeping the material nicely source separated so there's no contamination. So the best plastic recycling, if I can even say best in plastic in one sentence, is plastic that comes from your bottle bill, your refundable deposit law, because that's kept separate as opposed to your blue bin where you might get birthday cake on your plastic bottle or mustard on your newspaper. So, just putting something in your blue bin doesn't mean it gets recycled. You have to keep it clean, source separated. Then it goes to typically a material recovery facility where anything that's not really recyclable gets picked off the conveyor belt, and that will go to a landfill or incinerator. And the real test of recycling is, can you send it to a factory that's actually going to reuse the materials in some way? That's actual recycling as opposed to wish cycling, where you just put, for instance, all your plastic in your recycling bin and you cross your fingers and you wish it all got recycling. Most plastics do not get recycled. Only plastics that if you look at the bottom and it says number 1 or number 2, that's what you want to put in your recycling bin.
It sounds like there are some policy solutions to this problem, but for consumers living in places that are still figuring this out, what's your advice for them and how to deal with their plastic waste?
Well, first, don't feel guilty because we don't have a choice a lot when we go to a supermarket or even a food co-op. None of us voted for more plastic. Nothing tastes better in plastic. So, what you want to do is start with your kitchen because plastic that touches your food and beverage is what poses the greatest health risk because some of those 16,000 chemicals will leach into your food, especially if it gets hot. So, what I recommend people do is look at what you use the most that's plastic. So, for instance, if you're making coffee every morning in one of those little plastic pods, just stop
Mm.
because you're going to have hot water going through plastic. Find another way to make your coffee. But if you've got, for instance, a plastic ketchup container in your refrigerator, we're in my family, we're not condiment people. We hardly ever touch ketchup. I've got a plastic bottle of ketchup that's been in my refrigerator since the Obama administration. So I don't worry about that, but I do worry about juice and coffee and bread. So look at your heaviest use of plastic and see if you can reduce it. And that's not just for environmental reasons, but health researchers have recently identified the presence of microplastics in different parts of our body. Microplastics is 5 millimeters or less. And there are two issues. One is just the physicality, the little foreign object in your body is a problem. And then, second, all plastic contains toxic chemicals, and the toxics hitchhike on the microplastics. And sometimes, even worse than microplastics, is nanoplastics. So, just in the past few years, you guys mentioned I teach a class at Bennington College on plastic pollution, and I offer it on Zoom. Anyone can take it. It's every semester, 7 weeks, Wednesday evenings for 2 hours. When I started teaching the class, I wanted to do a whole class on health and plastics, and I could only find information on health damage where plastics are manufactured. So, for instance, in Louisiana, there is a stretch along the Mississippi River called Cancer Alley, where there's a concentration of plastic production facilities. There, the cancer rate is 7 times the national average, which is really criminal. So people living in frontline communities in Louisiana, Texas, Appalachia are having their health impacted. For you and I, if we don't live in those states or those communities, our health is still impacted because scientists have identified the presence of microplastics in our blood, our kidneys, our liver, our male testicles, in the human placenta, both the fetal side and the maternal side. So the baby's just hanging out for 7, 8, 9 months, is still exposed to microplastics. Sadly, microplastics have been found in breast milk. And for a while, the plastics industry would say, well, yes, there is microplastics in our bodies, but we mostly excrete it. So essentially, it's not causing harm. They can no longer say that. It is true that we excrete some of that, but not all of it. But just in the past year, there were two landmark studies showing harm. New England Journal of Medicine identified microplastics attaching to plaque in the arteries in our neck. And if that happens, you have an increased risk of stroke, heart attack, or premature death. Another study identified microplastics in the human brain and the fact that it has crossed the blood-brain barrier. And when that happens, you have an increased chance of getting Alzheimer's disease or neurological disease. These health impacts of plastic are very, very serious. And we now have enough medical information to act.
Those are some pretty scary health impacts that you just outlined, and that brings up the question for me, what can we do about this? And I think frequently when talking about issues of recycling and plastic pollution, a concept that comes up a lot in our conversations is EPR, extended producer responsibility. Now, when VPIRG is lobbying for a policy, we're doing it under this theory of change where the onus is on these corporations to make supporting the environment, living a healthy lifestyle as easy for the consumer as possible. How does EPR fit into all of that?
Well, traditional EPR, worst name ever, extended producer responsibility, puts a fee on packaging, and then that money is used to support local recycling programs. That's fine, but it doesn't solve the plastic pollution problem. So beyond plastics and Just Zero, and I think VPIRG are supporting a much more comprehensive approach that requires a 50% reduction in single-use plastic packaging over 10 years, bans the most toxic chemicals in packaging, including reproductive toxins. We should talk about that. Third, does not allow for chemical recycling to count as real recycling. And then, yes, puts a fee on packaging to support not only local recycling programs, but waste reduction, reuse, and refill. We want school districts in Vermont to have a funding source, for instance, to buy real dishes and dishwashing equipment in school cafeterias so our kids are not eating hot food off of single-use plastic plates and utensils. We're happy that the Burlington Airport has a water refill station, but how about every bus station, every park, every train station needs a water refill station? With this new approach, there'll be a funding source to cover things like that. And we have to really get moving on waste reduction, refill, and reuse. If you're not convinced from this fascinating conversation, I suggest if you have Netflix, you watch the new movie called The Plastic Detox, where the movie makers chronicle the lives of 6 couples that have been trying to get pregnant. And a scientist, the amazing Dr. Shauna Swan, who's our modern day Rachel Carson, she does an intervention and advises these families on how to reduce their use of plastic in their own lives. And the outcome is really surprising. So it's on Netflix now. You can watch it anytime. I'm not doing a Netflix advertisement, but you can watch it with organic popcorn in a glass bowl in your own living room and really learn a lot about the urgency on the need to reduce our use of plastic.
We'll make sure to have a link to that movie in the video description, so check it out.
Yeah, thank you so much. As somebody that tries really hard to reduce, plastic in my own life, it's really nice to have the reminder that this is not entirely the consumer's burden to bear. Like, it is also the people making the product that need to be held accountable. I'm so happy to be, working with you and others on doing that. So I know that you are a former EPA regional administrator. You have, significant experience in federal regulation. And, right now we are unfortunately living in a period of time where the EPA and the federal government more broadly are not necessarily upholding their environmental responsibilities, whether that's through rollbacks, whether that's inaction, actual active policy. So I'm curious, from your perspective as somebody that's worked inside that system at the federal level, what needs to happen when, the federal government is failing the environment and the people, and how can we step up as states to fill that gap?
It's such a good point. It is heartbreaking to see what's happening at my former agency, the EPA. And one of my greatest honors was being appointed regional administrator by President Obama. And every day we walked into work wanting to provide cleaner drinking water, cleaner air, less toxic exposure to Americans. The EPA right now is not only missing in action, but they are aggressively promoting polluting policies at the federal level. We all know that now. What's missing from the conversation is what can the states do to fill the gap? And I really have not seen many states stepping up. So in Vermont, how do we ramp up clean, renewable energy? How do we take a closer look at drinking water standards to make sure they're protective of public health? Get rid of all of the lead service lines and make sure you're not replacing it with PVC plastic pipe. We can pass stronger state laws to protect wetlands because the federal government won't be doing that anymore. And Vermont was so hard hit by flooding. And because of the climate crisis, we're going to see more flooding. We're going to see more wildfire smoke coming in from Canada. Just day-to-day stuff. We know we're going to have bad air quality in the summertime because of wildfire smoke. How do you provide relief to seniors, to people struggling with respiratory disease? We're going to need more cooling centers in the summertime. We're going to need places that have good indoor air quality so kids are not having asthma attacks triggered by wildfire smoke. We need more climate change resiliency. And even though Vermont is small, as we saw with the adoption of the Climate Superfund law, congratulations on that. Vermont can lead the way on a lot of policies, but it's going to take not necessarily leadership from your governor and your legislature, but leadership from the people. I'm a big believer in the phrase, when the people lead, the leaders will follow. And there are a lot of really smart, well-informed people in Vermont. You've got some great groups like VPIRG and Conservation Law Foundation and others doing really good work. And so rather than being in despair about our federal situation, okay, be a little bit in despair, but move past that and jump in at the state or local level to protect your community and your family's health. There's a lot we can do together.
I hear you on not trying to get bogged down in despair. And I think especially in this current moment with the actions of our federal government in, both the plastic sphere and well beyond, that can be really tough. Is there anything that's giving you hope right now? Any piece of good news that we can latch onto as we close out this conversation?
That is my least favorite question.
I'm
I get it
so
all the
sorry.
I get it all. I get it all the time, and I need to answer honestly. What gives me hope is the large number of people who are jumping in on the plastics issue. I mean, climate change is no doubt the most compelling issue of our generation. But it's hard to get people really engaged and active on climate. I mean, there are certainly rare exceptions. Bill McKibben with Third Act is doing incredible work, VPIRG, the Sunrise Movement. It's different with plastics because we touch it with our own hands every single day. And I see people from all walks of life getting involved on the plastics issue. And I just feel very privileged that I have this perch where I can see everything unfolding around the country. We have about 192 local groups and affiliates within the Beyond Plastic banner. And these are ordinary people who just roll up their sleeves and they want to get active on the issue. So that genuinely does give me hope. But we're going up against the chemical, fossil fuel, and plastic industry all at once. So we need more people in the boat rowing in the same direction with us.
That sounds like as good of a message as we could possibly hope for. Thank you so much, Judith Enck, for joining us on Vermont's Voice, and we will see you next time.
Thanks for having me.
What a great conversation. It's refreshing to talk to somebody like Judith who will tell you how bad things are, but also then leave you with a message of hope, however small that hope may be.
I know she's awesome, and I just feel so inspired right now. Like, I am so thankful that I get to do the good work and be working on this issue right now.
For sure. I was really struck by something she said about how hard it is to talk to people about climate change, but how easy it is or how much easier it is to talk about the plastics issue. And that reminded me of one of my first years canvassing with VPIRG. It was one of these grab bag canvases where we had like 5 different issues. Climate was one of them. Plastics was one of them. And I found the same thing. Like, it's really difficult to talk to people about climate impacts. I think now probably a little easier because we've seen so many direct impacts in Vermont. But the plastics issue, it's just so much more tangible for folks. Like, you can see trash on the side of the road. You can see the impacts that plastic pollution has much more clearly than climate pollution.
Yeah, now there's this whole, public health aspect of it, which I know Judith, touched on, but I mean, I can't stop thinking about a spoonful of microplastics in my brain.
Yes. More on that soon. Before, though, I wanted to ask, what's the state of plastics legislation in Vermont? What's VPIRG been up to this session?
Yeah, I am so glad you asked. So, VPIRG has been trying to tackle this issue of plastic pollution for decades. Just a couple of years ago, we passed what was, at the time, the most comprehensive single-use plastics ban in the country, banning certain takeout containers, banning plastic bags, all kinds of good stuff, but we're definitely not done. Just this year, legislators have tried to move forward a bill that would do a couple of things, banning microplastics from certain personal care products and cleaning products, banning certain chemicals from medical IV bags and tubing, and then also, as we just talked about, banning chemical recycling. That bill did not meet the deadline it needed to continue moving forward, but we can actually potentially take some of those provisions and move them forward through bills that are still moving. So we will definitely keep you all posted on that. There is more to come.
That's good to hear. So there's a chance we might see some plastics legislation this year, just maybe not in the original form. Well, this has been a great conversation. Gonna close out with a bit of fun. You and I actually shot a great informational video on microplastics, and I think that's the perfect high note to leave this episode on. So folks, enjoy.
Cool.
Nearly everybody agrees that there's too much plastic in our lives and in our environment, and the problem's just getting worse. And it's easy to understand why when you realize just how fast the production of plastic is increasing. In 2024, over 450 million tons of plastic were produced worldwide, and that figure is expected to double by 2050 and triple by 2060. But what you might not know is how toxic it is and how much of it lingers in our bodies as tiny bits of microplastics. Plastic doesn't biodegrade. Instead, it breaks into smaller and smaller pieces over hundreds of years. If the Pilgrims had sailed the Atlantic with single-use coffee cups, that plastic would still be with us today, just in many little pieces. These plastic pieces become so small they can be ingested into our bodies or even inhaled as we breathe. When you drink from a plastic water bottle, microwave food in a plastic container, or even brew tea from a tea bag, you're just taking in more plastic. One scientific study released last year even found microplastics in our brains, up to a spoon's worth. And I don't mean a spoonful, I mean the equivalent of an entire plastic spoon in your brain. And like I said before, the problem is just getting worse. That same study found that concentrations of microplastics in the human brain could actually be increasing by as much as 50% between 2016 and 2024. So should you be concerned? Well, yes. The same study that discovered so much plastic in the brain also found a correlation between higher concentrations of microplastics and dementia. Microplastics have also been associated with Alzheimer's disease, heart attacks, respiratory conditions, and increased risk for certain cancers. The list goes on. More study is needed, but these findings are certainly alarming. That's why VPIRG is making it a priority to reduce the quantity and the toxicity of plastics here in Vermont. That's why we're working on real, tangible policies aimed at reducing plastic packaging, regulating microplastics and toxic chemicals in consumer products, and banning environmentally hazardous chemical recycling facilities. Learn more about our new campaign and take action at stopplasticpollutionvt.org.